So first of all, I was a ADHD dyslexic boy. That was enough where now I'm the bullied kid. So walking to school was the coolest guy I've ever seen in my life, working on a sports car underneath a carport. And when I got close to him, I said, nice car, and he said, you like cars? And I said, I love cars. The week before I turned 15, coming home from school one day, his car's running, sitting at the curb. And he said, do you want to go for a ride? And I said, yes. When Billy took me for a ride, then pulled in an alleyway and showed off his car, and then took me up the back stairs to an apartment. And there was his junkie heroin addict partner, and so they made up a combination of methamphetamine and heroin and injected me. And so that was my introduction to drugs. I got out of there, and I ran to the police station, which is only about 3 blocks away on Lundy's Lane. But on the way there, this is how victims think. This is my fault. Mom doesn't know about Billy because he's older. She would have said no. So instead of going to the police station where I was going to get in trouble because it's my fault, I stayed at a hostel on Bridge Street and was assaulted that night. My dad found me a few days later, and I went home and said I was sorry, but I'd lost my ability to say what was happening to me during those bullying years. I went to bed and then ran away. So by 19, I was probably designated by the Toronto Robbery Homicide as one of the most dangerous men in Canada. So they had a Canada-wide warrant on me. I was robbing everything that moved, and at 21, they finally got me. Armed robbery ×3, weapons ×4, assault, police escape, custody, and possession of narcotics under gangsterism. And then when I was in jail, I added a bunch more to it by escaping and doing different things. And so I was up to about 39 years. And then Supreme Court of Canada looked at it and knocked it down to 25. I was only in Collins Bay Prison for about 3 months doing an apprenticeship program in the lower garage. And a guard walked up to me and said, I want you to build a car for me. And I looked at him and swore at him. You can't work for guards. And he just kept talking. And at the end, he said, I'll give you a jar of coffee and a carton of American cigarettes every week that you work on my car. American cigarettes and coffee? Well, guess what I did for the next 25 years? First of all, the old Don Jail and Kingston Penitentiary, they are old school. So it was solitary confinement was called the hole. And the reason it was called the hole is because they took the toilet out because you could plug it, right? And then flood the whole thing and you could cause problems. That was where you went to wash. Raised concrete platform, roll of toilet paper. You lay on the concrete and you put your toilet paper as a pillow. And once a day you get, the door has a 4-inch crack underneath it and they slide in a cup with water and a slice of bean loaf. And I go into solitary confinement and there's a Gideon's Bible, little red Gideon's Bible sitting next to a toilet paper roll. And I went in and I picked it up and I threw it at the guy's head and said, take this effing thing. And it hit him in the head. And the door is closing and the guard smiles at me and he goes, now do you want the Bible? And I looked behind me and he had taken my roll of toilet paper. So this is the only paper I'm getting for the next 20 days. And I would read the New Testament under the crack of the door. And so I loved reading the New Testament. I would read it every time I would go in solitary and I would imagine stories. In 1993, after 15 years in, I decided to take my own life. And in that room, my dad's voice came to me, like he was standing behind me. And he used to say this thing, if it's all lost, ask God to. If it's all lost, let's go to treatment. If it's all lost, Rick, try one more time. And so, you know, I'd never heard voices. I wouldn't have minded the company. You know, I think it's a boring place, right? So I said, okay, God, let me be the guy on the cross next to you. Let me go to heaven on grace. Let me die like a man in the yard when it's my turn. I flushed my drugs down the toilet and went junk sick and gave my heart to God. So a professor comes in my life and challenges me. And he knew how to deal with dyslexia and how to teach me to do things 3 different ways so I can check my own work. 3 years later, I become the 17th person in Canadian history to get a university degree from inside a penitentiary. And so my dad got to watch me graduate at Queen's. And so I started saying, I need to come back and spend time with boys that are in damage to give them a chance. So I start building custom Harleys and hot rods. And that started Ozzy's Garage. So Ozzy's Garage comes under an umbrella, a charity umbrella, Truth for Teens. And so I quickly realized that the cool factor of a chopper or a muscle car would let me work with guys long enough to earn the right to ask what's going on in their life. But they also need to know that God exists. If I stood in front of my boys and said, God, your Heavenly Father loves you, absolutely true statement, they would say, what's a father? And then the next thing would be, what's love? Before they'd ever come to, who's God? A lot of these boys, if they don't meet somebody who's been damaged like them and then is healed, don't see themselves healing. They need to know a safe man. I need to be that safe man for them, and then slowly they start telling me what's going on. When I became a Christian, I could not see what God could see in me. It's a different thing than what we're taught, you know, as to 1 and 1 makes 2. With God, 1 and 1 makes 150. It's all God's. He sends it out how he wants it.
Hi, and welcome to Follow Me. My name's Rick Osborne. Everybody calls me Ozzy since I was 4 or 5 years old. I grew up in Ridgeway, Crystal Beach. I can hear my dog crying in the background. I grew up in Crystal Beach, Shirkston, so area, right? And I'm a Shirk. So my mom was a Shirk, and my dad's an Osborne, obviously. And growing up in Crystal Beach, I knew everybody. My mom said you can know our family history by just going down the streets. So Wilhelms, my grandma was a Winger, and my uncles were Wilhelms. And my mom was actually a Wilhelm, but my grandpa died in the Second World War. So my grandpa is the last name on the cenotaph in Fort Erie. So growing up, second oldest boy, a year and a couple months younger than my older brother Phil, who was a big part of my life because he took care of me like older brothers should, right? But I was a little bit different. Now, by different, now you'd say ADHD, dyslexic, but I don't agree with those definitions. They're manufactured definitions and they can be anywhere on the spectrum. One thing I would say is AD, and then the next H, I would say hypersensitive as opposed to hyperactive. I felt everything. And because of that, I was a different boy. My mom, if you ask my mom, I was born in, like I say, born in Fort Erie Hospital. My mom would say I was born in a barn and my ears were painted on. And I didn't know what that meant until I was older, but I never paid attention to it. So I was a different boy, but I was a self-soother. By the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I thought my middle name was Outside, Rick Outside. She quickly realized that outside I would be okay. It didn't take me long, too, to realize I was different because of the way I was fed. So at night, I got cinnamon toast before I went to bed. If you gave any other boy sugar toast before they went to bed, they'd be wound, and it put me to sleep. So there was something different with me than the other boys. My best friend was Carrie Wilhelm, my first cousin. My uncle's farm on Pleasant Beach Road was where I spent my summers. My dad would shave my head, and he called it a machinist haircut, set the clippers at 60 thou, and shave till you hit the wood. And I didn't think that was very funny, but he did. And they would send me, easier to keep clean. And so I don't even think I wore shoes unless it was winter time, when I was here the whole time. My grandpa, who wasn't, he was my great uncle, but I didn't know that. They called him Uncle Erie. Because I couldn't say Uncle Erie, his name became Cleary. So my Grandpa Cleary, so I never knew how weird that was. My Grandpa Cleary was my best friend. He lived one street over from us. He had a lathe where he'd make me a baseball bat that's bigger than other guys' baseball bats so I could hit the ball easy. He would spend time with me all the time. I always remember him walking around with wood shavings all over him and glasses on top of his head saying, "Do you know where my glasses are?" And I'd say, "They're right on top of your head, Cleary." He would drive me to the store once a week. I would stand on the seat next to him and hug his neck to buy me candy. When we moved to St. Catharines when I was about 9 years old, he moved with us. So he came and stayed with us. Aunt Grace, his wife, went to live with Carrie. I didn't know what was going on. What was happening was he had cancer. He needed to be near the SANS, the sanitarium. It was the hospital where Brock University is right now, off to the one side. We lived on Lockhart Drive, the street underneath. And so he lived with us. And so he would do school with me. He would help me with things. And I played in the woods across the road every day. My mom would take dried salamanders out of my pocket when she washed my jeans. I was outside all the time. I thought that the black tar of the concrete roads between the cracks made excellent gum, which my mom found crazy when she'd pull it out of my mouth, black teeth and everything. And I was okay. I did not know Grandpa was sick. When we moved to Niagara Falls, I guess it was near the end of Grandpa's life, and he moved with us. And in Niagara Falls, I got bullied. We showed up halfway through the school year in Rolling Acres, and I'm a new kid. I'm ADHD dyslexic. I say things backwards when it's my turn to read. Hope everybody got that. And guys make fun of me, and they were picking on girls, and I don't like them picking on girls. And so they beat me up. There was 2 guys and 1 girl that were the bullies in grade 6, and they had been kept back a year. That's what you did if you didn't get a D to get through to the next year, you get kept back a year. And I never thought about what terrible life they had that they were kept back a year. But I'm 65 years old right now, and I can tell you their first and last names and go show you the house they lived in. That's how much it impacted me. I never did sports because if I did sports, they showed up and they beat me up. And I was a tough boy. I didn't know how to, I would try to fight them every way I could. I just didn't have the skill set. So I'd let them beat me up again. I would not kowtow to them. I don't even know if that's a real word. I would not back down to them. And so by grade 8, if you asked what Rick was like, quiet boy, doesn't do very well in school, rides his mini bike at the sand pits on Stanley Avenue all night till it's dark. I'd gone quiet. I found that if I didn't say, real men don't cry, real men don't whine, suck it up, it'll be okay. When I started high school in 1970, 14 years of age, the bullies were going to Stamford Green. The catchment area of Drummond Road, they were on the other side. And so I'm going to A. and Meyer. They're not going to be I am going to self-actualize. I didn't know that word, by the way. Life is going to be good. I'm walking to school. Everybody walked to school back then. If you got a ride to school, you had a doctor's appointment. You know, like that. Everybody walked to school. I walked to school. I saw the coolest guy I've ever seen in my life working on a sports car. Austin Healy, underneath a carport between his house and the garage. And Austin Healys are cool cars. Even MGs and everything were cool cars, British sports cars, but Austin Healys, I'd never seen one before. And so he was 21 years old. He had long hair, Fu Manchu mustache, bell bottoms, platform shoes, paisley shirt with a Nehru collar. He was the epitome of cool. I was still, khakis and desert boots. I was still grade 8. And I said to him when I went by, I said, cool car. And he said, you like cars? And I said, I loved cars. And he became my friend. I couldn't wait to see him on the way to school, on the way home, hand him tools for 5 or 10 minutes and tell him about my day. I just wanted to be him. He was the coolest guy. One day, the week before I turned 15, it was a beautiful September and beginning of October of the year too. Most days were really nice. I could work with him on his car. And I'm coming home from school and his car's running. And so he says, hey, Rick, do you want to go for a ride? I'm a 14-year-old boy. Unless you hit me with a brick, I'm going for a ride. Even though I'm supposed to call my mom if I don't come straight home. That's the rule. So I was supposed to go in, use his phone on the wall in the kitchen, by the way. That's where phones were. And call my mom and say where I was. But I didn't tell my mom about him. He was too old. My mom would have said that's too big of it. You can't have a friend that much older than you. But I wasn't doing anything wrong. And so I went for a ride with this guy, which was the biggest mistake of my life. This guy took me to the corner of Main and Ferry in Niagara Falls, pulled in an alleyway, walked me up the stairs to an apartment where his junkie partner was, and they injected me with a combination of methamphetamine and heroin. I overdosed, unconscious. When I came to, I had peed myself. There was water, there was ripped up magazines and everything where I was. I didn't find out till years later that ripping with your hands is called punding, repetitive ripping and tearing of anything your hands get a hold of in a chronic, severe methamphetamine overdose. When I came to, all I knew was I was in trouble big time, and I ran out of there and ran to the police station. But on the way there, I talked myself into that this was my fault. And that's what victims do. And that's what I've been doing for the last 2 years. It's how I learned to process. And so I went to a hostel on Bridge Street. You paid $1. By the way, dollars were paper back then. You paid $1 and you got a cot for the night. And I was assaulted by an older man that first night. I slept out on the street the next night. 2 working girls found me, took me to their motel, and split a cap of heroin with me. And that quickly I was a junkie. I'd been set up, and the addiction the heroin just held me safe in that little cocoon. And that's what I started. My dad found me and brought me home. I now was so ashamed of myself. You know, besides the feeling of high and being powerful when I was high and all of that, there was a shame that I had done this and that I now did not belong with my family. And I left and lived on the street. And it was a terrible year. You know, I overdosed twice. If it was today with fentanyl and everything, that would have been the end of me, you know. And I overdosed twice. And, you know, I would go see my mom. My mom was my one constant. She always would, you know, my dad, I was afraid of my dad. I wouldn't go near my dad. I'd wait till he left and I'd go see my mom and have leftovers with my mom. And she told me she cried all the time. She cried all the time and vacuumed and cried and cleaned the house. She would joke, I have the cleanest house and everything. And one day I said, why are you crying all the time, Mom? And she goes, because people in the church are ostracizing me. And she had to explain it to me. And I think it's important for church people to understand that, you know, when this kind of thing happens, don't hurt the parents over it. A lot of times it isn't their fault, right? And but anyway, my mom, I found out later that my mom had nightmares at night and she would wake up crying because I hadn't been ID'd yet. No fingerprint, no ID. And she thought if I died, she'd never know. I'd be John Doe toe tagged somewhere. And I never knew any of this, of course, egocentric. My appendix ruptured. I remember being at the sand pits playing all day and fighting and rolling in a dune buggy we stole down the hill. And I thought the reason I was so sore is because I had rolled and I'd hurt myself. And I went home and curled up in my mom's gremlin in the garage. It's one thing my parents did that they were very wise about. They left their garage open. You could, if you need somewhere to sleep, you can stay there. So I would always, my dad had big cars, but I always sleep in my mom's because they smelled of my mom and I liked that. And so I couldn't get up in the morning. I waited for my dad to leave and my mom came out to go to a store and she found me curled up in vomit laying on the thing. And she drove me to the hospital. I was 2 weeks in the hallway of the hospital because I was a junkie. So I wasn't allowed to go into juvie care, pediatric care. I had to be in the hallway because junkies were deviant. And that was what was back then. And I remember my mom running her fingers through my hair and talking to me softly as I laid there. And then I healed and everything. And then I overdosed again. And this time, because of this, they put me into the psych wing for 30 days and did drug treatment on me. Drug treatment was electroshock therapy. When I got, I don't even remember it. I just remember looking at other people when they came out. And when I got out of there, I thought, that's it. I'm out of here. I'm going to leave this area. And my brother had a girlfriend come over to visit him from Buffalo. And she looked at me and I stole her car and drove to Florida at 15 and got a job working the beach down in Florida. And I could get heroin very cheap at $7 a gram. I made $5 an hour working the beach. They had fish huts down there, and I love fish stew. And we would clean the beach at night. And it was all guys 17, 18 years old like me. And except for one guy who was 30-something years old. And he was the coolest guy. He smoked weed. We thought that was cool. At 3 in the morning, we'd pile in his GTO convertible and put the 8-track on and listen to Jethro Tull or something, B.B. King, and go to the fish huts and have something to eat. And one day he stopped at the trailer park where I lived and said, hey, it's going to rain tonight. You want me to, I'll give you a ride to work. I have some really good weed. We were starting on Flamingo Park, which is the bottom of Miami, and then running north about 5 kilometers and cleaning that night. And we drove to the water's edge. We were a little early, and he attacked me. And I survived the attack and got into the water, and he couldn't find me. And then when he left, I crawled out on the sand, and I remember fire trucks coming across the causeway, and I wake up in ICU, and I have operations I have to go through to fix me. And police came in, and they said, what happened to you? 2 detectives, 2 fat men in cheap suits. What happened to you? And because I'd been on the street a year, don't snitch, don't rat. You do not talk to cops. And it's one of the first rules I learned on the street. So I said to them, I was hitchhiking, a guy picked me up and attacked me. Meanwhile, he works with me. I totally know who he is and his name and everything. And they said, was it this guy? And they showed me a picture of a mugshot and a guy's crime underneath. I said, no. And they showed me about 9 more of them. And I said no to each one. And they put their thing away and they left. And I realize now that 2 men don't need to be there to show you pictures. One man is showing you pictures and the other man is watching your reaction to the pictures. So even though I didn't say anything, I didn't realize that they would have known by my reaction which one it was. And he was one of the guys, and he was a rapist, killer of a young boy doing a life sentence out of Jacksonville State Prison, and he was on parole. And I said no. And you know what? I was ready to go to Pensacola Air Force Base for recovery afterwards because I'm a dual citizen. And all of a sudden the detectives come and they fly me to Atlanta handcuffed. And then in Atlanta, I escape out of the bathroom window and they catch me a mile down the street in the ditch. And then they fly me to Buffalo and in bare feet. And on the way they said, oh, Bill said not to put shoes on him because he's a runner. And I realized they're taking me to my dad. My dad's name is Bill. And they took me to the border. And my dad came across the Peace Bridge and signed for me and showed ID to claim me and cried. I'd never seen my dad cry. I'd lost about 40 pounds. I still had sutures down the side of me and I was training into 2 bags. Bare feet, baggy jeans on, and a hospital smock on the top. And we got in the car and we drove over to the Canadian side. I could not even pull my eyes up to look at my father's face. And we got to Canadian side. I said, pull over, and I got out and walked away. I became a cutter after that. I started cutting myself, and I now feared men. So I haven't even had a girlfriend yet, and I've been assaulted by men several times. And so I didn't even know what my sexuality was or anything because of this. And I started fearing men and hurting men because of that. Like, so I didn't buy drugs from men. I stabbed men and took their drugs. I hit them with a hammer and took their drugs. I became what's called a ripoff. And then I ripped off a Satan's Choice. And I remember I ripped off a guy, and then the buzz came around the next day that somebody ripped off Fast Eddie from the Satan's Choice. And I went, uh-oh. And so I went and hid in a little town called Port Colborne because nobody's going to look for me there. And there was this great big biker by the name of Mother. His real name is Garnet McEwen. He was the boss of the Satan's Choice. He was 6'5" and 400 pounds, and he had me under his arm like a loaf of bread. And I thought, I'm going to get cracked off the side of the canal and thrown in the canal where they swim. Death by misadventure. And he noogied me and said, hey, you little rascal, quit robbing my guys. And he took me home. And so he's the one who brought me into the bikers. And I have nothing bad to say about bikers. I became my damage he liked. By 19, I was one of Canada's most dangerous men. And that was robbery, homicide, putting that Canada-wide warrant on me out of Toronto. It took another almost 2 years for them to get me. At 21, I went to jail for armed robbery ×3, weapons ×4, assault, police, escape custody, and possession of narcotics under gangsterism. I did 15 years. During those 15 years, I escaped 2 times. The guards had a nickname for me, SB. And they used to write it on paperwork when they'd move me and grease pencil. And I finally said one day, I said, I know what that means, why you call me SB. And they go, why do we call you SB, Ozzy? And I said, because that means security breach. And they said, nope, that's not why. Well, what's my nickname? Sneaky bastard. So that was my nickname by Garth. At 15 years in, I got out. Even though I had a lot more time to go, because I went in at 21 under the old rules, I got what's called a mandatory release. So I got sent to St. Catharines, to actually Thorold, to a house on Pine Street. I was a biker and I was a soldier in that bike club, and we were warring. And the halfway house had to take me, so they rented a house across the street and put me in there and said, you stay there, and put plywood on their windows. And 3 weeks out, first attempt on my life, I survived that, lots of stitches, a couple broken bones. And 2 weeks later, it happens again. But that's not what the bottom was. The bottom was I went to see my mom, and my mom ran to a motel room. She was so afraid of me. And she should have been. I had a hit squad on me, and I got hit later that night. But I survived because, SB had a bulletproof vest on. So I survived, even though I was busted up pretty bad by the motorcycle accident afterwards. And I went back to jail. And when I went to jail, that was it. I wasn't even good to my own guys because my addiction was so bad. I robbed everybody that moved. When I was in jail waiting to go back to Millhaven, the lawyer was holding up all the reports that had gone into police, and it was reports of guys on my assault on them, what I'd done to them, right? Because there were guys in prison and I would spot them, and I just had so much hate in me. So when I went back to prison, I decided to take my own life. I had 60 days in solitary confinement before I go out Supermax, before I get released into Millhaven maximum security. I got 5 rival gang members waiting for me in Millhaven, and their boss is the one who just shot me, who tried to take me out. I have what's called an open contract on me. If you kill me inside, your sister or your brother or your mom can have the money. Those are not survivable, not in a maximum security. So I had enough heroin in my body, don't ask, to last the 60 days. My dad, when he rescued me at the border, paid $4,000 in Canadian money, which was worth more than, so about a year's salary for those detectives to bring me to the border. It was a money earning gig that those detectives would do. They would find if there was a rich kid, they'd find the parent and see, whether they could make some money by bringing them back, which is actually altruistic, but they make some money on it. My dad used to say to me, that man, my dad, was my definition of a real man. My Christian dad was the definition of a real man. I couldn't be one, but he was. He would say to me, it's an American term, he's an American guy, if it's all lost, Rick. And he'd say, if it's all lost, Rick, let's go to treatment. And he'd drive me to treatment, he'd pay for treatment, and I'd run away the next day. And he'd see me again, if it's all lost, Rick, let's go, I'll pay your rent for the next month and we'll get you some clothes. If it's all lost, Rick, try one more time. If it's all lost, Rick, ask God to come in your life. It's all lost, Rick. This was a term he used. And I'm standing in that cell. You can imagine a Supermax cell. Let me tell you what a Supermax cell is. 1, 2, 3, turn. That's how many steps you get. 1, 2, 3, turn. 1, 2, 3, turn. Stainless steel toilet, stainless steel bed, stainless steel mirror, all dented up from guys punching it and pounding their heads against it. And I just stood there looking at my dented reflection in the mirror, and I went, I'm going to be better off dead. And my dad's voice came to me like he was standing behind me and said, if it's all lost, Rick, ask God. Try one more time. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm crazy. I'm crazy now. I'm hearing voices. I wouldn't have mind hearing voices. It's boring in prison, wouldn't mind in the company. But here I am, ready to take my life, and my dad's voice came. And there's only one man I'd listen to, and that was my dad. And so I remember my Bible, my Gideon's Bible, that I would read all the time. There's Christian guards that are Gideons that bring the New Testaments in and put them everywhere, including solitary. So I knew the New Testament. And the guy on the cross next to Jesus, I could be that guy. And so my prayer to God was, let me die like a man in the yard. Let me go to heaven on grace like the criminal on the cross next to you. And that was it. I didn't know how, I just knew how to say, I know who you are, and I know you love me, and just give me this. I couldn't live in this world. Let me live in the other world, right? And just like the guy on the cross, couldn't do anything either. And that started my journey. And believe me, it's an incredible journey. You know, like I got released into Millhaven, and 5 guys with weapons couldn't come closer than 10 feet to me. I put Bible verses on my shirt with a Sharpie to go to yard, because even the guard said, "Don't go to yard, Ozzy," and because they knew it was going to happen. And those guys, until I got, and then a professor from Queen's University who ran the legal department there, and he ran a program called Queen's Law. He came in to see me and he said, "You know what? We're going to get you into a treatment program." Why would that happen? Never had a guy with my length of time ever gone to Sault Ste. Marie to treatment. And I got to go to treatment. And you know what? When I came back from treatment, I said to God, "That's good enough. Thanks. You can take me now." Right? Never going to exist in the real world. I'm never going to amount to anything. I have a great education, but I'm not a cutter anymore. Never cut again, by the way. And I'm not a junkie anymore. I'm not doing 1 and 2 points of heroin every day and trying to get the money together. You know, I couldn't believe I could walk straight in a prison. And I went, "That's good enough." But that's not good enough for God. And I remember being in Collins Bay, and we had, I was part of the committee. There's 10 guys who represent the prison body. And we got called down to the chapel one night because we have guests coming in. Now, guests coming in are Royal Military College, Queen's University, OH Psychiatric Teaching Hospital, or politicians. It's in that spectrum. And so we go down there, and 10 guys are sitting there, and in walk 2 beautiful young women, second-year social deviance students from Queen's, and in behind them, they're the professor. 9 guys got up and went, "Girls!" And I sat there because I'm older and smarter. And in through the door came this old professor. One arm didn't work, one leg didn't work. He had pee stain happening. His shirt was buttoned up wrong. He had nicotine all down the front of him and ashes, orange beard, hair comb with a stick, bullet wounds on his forehead and neck. I have bullet wounds all over me. I've been shot like 6 times. I went over to him and I said, "Are you an old soldier? My grandpa died in the Second World War." And he looks at me and he goes, "Sniper, Belgium resistance," and talked to me for 2 hours. I could not, you know, I've never had a soldier tell me anything about war. They don't talk about it, but he did. And at the end, we're ready to go. Apparently these 9 guys have 2 girlfriends. But him, as we're going out the door, he looks at me and he goes, "You seem like a really smart guy, Rick. How come you don't have a university degree?" And I looked at him with my mouth open and went, "We're in prison in case you didn't notice." Highest you go is grade 10, you know, and that's with Frontier College tutoring you. Really the highest is grade 8. I have a grade 8. I'm learning disabled. I'm dyslexic. And he looked at me and I said, "I'm not very smart." And he looked at me and he goes, "You're very smart. I'm going to help you get a GED. And together we're going to challenge Queen's University. And you're going to do a degree in my department. And when you graduate, I'm going to have your Queen's ring waiting for you." And he shows me his Queen's ring and he walks out the door. And I go, "That's the most senile guy I've ever met in my life." And the next day I get called down to security, and there's Bill Leggett, the principal of Queen's University, and Wilfred Vanderven, that professor of psychology, and Nelson Friedman, the professor of philosophy. And the 3 of them need to look at my paperwork to make sure I'm not a sex offender, because that's the bylaws of Queen's, and I'm not. And then they're jumping in my life. And that professor spent the next 3 years teaching me how to do things 3 ways, teaching me, 5 to 7 days a week. He was allowed to come into the prison as a citizen advisory from Queen's University. And even when I would go back to Millhaven for fighting again or get shipped to a different prison, he would be there. He'd pull up a chair next to my cell and we would go out. And 3 years later, I became the 17th guy in Canadian history to get a university degree from inside a prison. Do you know what? Okay, God, that's good enough. And you know what? I felt so confident in myself that this is sticking. I'll never be in the real world. I'll never get out, but I'm a Christian now. So I asked my mom to come visit me, and my mom and dad came to visit me on Mother's Day. And I stood in front of my mom, and I did the AANA thing where I apologized and everything, and asked to come back in the family, that I'm okay, I'm a Christian now. And of course, she was beaming the whole time. And when I was done, she goes, "You done?" And I go, "Yeah." She got up and hugged me, and she said, "Soon as I saw your eyes, I knew I have different eyes," right? And so that was good. That was good enough. That was good enough. And then Queen's University talked to the professor and different people because I was such an example. I'm actually in the book for that year that they put out. Could you let him come to Queens so we can graduate him, so we can convocate him here? And so I dressed in the best set of clothes in that prison. Whoever had the good stuff, we went through it till I looked good. And I went out to Queen's University and I got to graduate at Queen's University. My dad was terminally ill. My dad got to see me graduate at Queen's. And I remember being back at prison and going, okay, that's good enough. That's good enough, right? When I came back to prison, when I went to the Queen's, there was a box waiting for me besides my gown and everything else. And I opened the box and here's the Queen's ring. This is an $800 ring. And I sat with all these rich, good-looking young Queen's kids. And I've got tattoos on my hands. And by the way, these are cover up and names of my daughters and everything. But I had biker stuff on my hands and knuckles. And I'm sitting there and the girl next to me nudges the guy next to her and points at my hands. And this guy leans forward and looks at my hands. And I think, don't go there today. Don't ask me about my tattoos or where I come from, And they said, can we see the ring? I was the only owner of the Queen's ring. And I got handed up and down the aisle. And I sat there and I looked down the aisle and all I could think of is that song from Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the other. I was a 250-pound guy from Collins Bay sitting there graduating. So I got to graduate from Queen's. When I came down off the platform, I hugged my professor, kissed his scratchy cheek, and told him I loved him. And for me to hug a man, to touch another man without a knife in my hand was just unheard of, right? And he whispered in my ear, like most professors, BA is the kindergarten of learning, let's start your next degree. So I started another thing from McMaster, and so I have addiction care work diploma from McMaster University too, because I want to work in addictions. But when I was doing that, a teacher from this prison that would come into the prison and worked in the prison was sitting there out in the front row. And I thought that was so cool that this teacher, single mom with 3 little boys, would come watch me graduate at Queen's. And I married her, by the way. But it's just incredible how God shaped all of that. And then, me getting out of prison, my sentence being knocked down to 20, and then the escape got me 5 more. So I got 25, that I could even see the end of it. So I went in at 21 and came out at 46. Shaped to work with young men just like me, because my damage was young. Right? And then I just repeated the same year over and over again. Like prison, you can go to prison and find 65-year-old punks because they haven't matured at all, right? And so that's been my passion ever since then. And that started, I remember going into high schools, going into juvie facilities, working with probation and parole with any way I could tell my story to young people and work with them. The tattoos all over me are the entrance. That's how they know I'm real. The scarred face, that's how they know I'm real, right? And they can see the damage in me and that I'm healed. And I remember, but I could not hold a job. I remember a guy who knew my sister and dated, he owned a trucking company. And I went to see him when I got out. And he said, oh, Ozzy, when did you get out? And I said, on Friday. And he goes, you want a job? And I said, yeah. He goes, what can you do? I said, welding, fabricating, right? And he goes, I'll start Monday morning, $56,000 to start with benefits. And that was a huge amount of money. And I'm a good welder fabricator, so that was okay. I showed up on Monday morning with my tools and my welding jacket, my helmet in my hand, and pressed the buzzer to the gate. And nobody came. And I pressed it again and nobody came. I can see his truck. And then finally he walked down to the gate and looked at me and he goes, Ozzy, I can't even let you on my property. And I said, what are you talking about, Mike? You own the company. And he goes, as soon as I put your name in, my insurance company said, we will void your policy if you put that guy on the property. So it doesn't matter whether you have a criminal record, it matters whether you're bondable, right? And so I went and did an interlocking paving stone driveway for a friend of mine's dad. And when I was done, he said, here's a check. And I said, I don't have a bank account. By the way, I still can't go in a bank. Used to rob them. So he goes, I'll go cash it and give you the cash. I said, I want the cash. And he looks at me, he goes, what do you want? And I said, I want that. And in his garage was an 89 Camaro with a Corvette engine in it, candy apple red, and the license plate said Big Toy. And he goes, what are you going to do with that? And I says, restore it and sell it and buy another. And that started me building my hot rods like I did all the time in prison for guards. And I remember one day Heather, who was a vice principal in Newmarket, coming back from school, and I'm down the road from the high school. And she said to me, "Can I ask you something, Rick?" And I go, "Sure." She goes, "How much work do you get done during the day?" And I go, "Not much." And she goes, "Why?" And I said, "Because all the high school kids stop here. The boys stop here." And that started Aussie's Garage. My first Aussie's Garage was Sudbury, then North Bay, then on the reserves up in northern Quebec, which we still work with to this day. Heather's going back again in April. We still work with Auger Bougamou, which is a beautiful reserve up in northern Quebec by Chibougamau. And we just love doing it. And so it's funny how God, like Heather worked as a teacher in prisons for over 10 years, and I needed a woman who knew how to take care of a prisoner, like, and what their brain was like and everything. And so it's just, and so I never thought in my entire life that I would ever not be a drug addict. Been a drug addict since I was 15. And I never thought I would be a father, and I never thought I would be a husband. And meanwhile, I'm all of, I'm not a drug addict anymore, but I'm not a cutter, and I'm not, and so what I am is blessed. I wake up every morning going, "Thank you, Lord. I know exactly what you've done for me." Not once did I think that I did any of this. I didn't pull up my socks. I didn't rally. I wasn't capable of doing this. Broken can't fix broken. I needed something else. And that's why, like, when I was in prison, if I had a nickel for every guy who came up next to me and said, "How are you like this, Aussie?" Right? And one of my worst enemies in prison attacked me when he came to the prison I was in, because the last time we were together was on K2 in Millhaven, and it was a riot, and it was very violent. People died in it. And so he was very afraid of me. And he came and had attacked me. And I'm a Christian guy coming out of the school. I'm doing tutoring with guys. And here he is, and he punches me as hard as he can. And he woke up on the ground. I knocked him out. And I remember standing there going, "Well, that's not very Christian." and the guards coming to get him and handcuff him and take him back to maximum security where he came from. And me going, time out, that's my fault." And they went, "We watched that on the camera. That's not your fault." And I said, "Am I different than I was 8 years ago?" And they went, "Yeah." And I said, "He doesn't know that. Give him a pass." And he talked bad about me for a year, and I would say to guys, "I'm right here." Figure it out, right? Just let him do it. And then one day he walked up next to me and he said, "How are you like this?" And I said, "Why did you attack me?" And he says, "Because I heard you were a Christian." And I said, "Why would that make a difference?" And he goes, "Christians are weak." And I said, "Who told you that?" And he says, "That's what somebody told me. Also, in the Bible, it says you have to turn the other cheek." And so I stopped in the yard of a medium security prison and looked at this guy and said, "Are you quoting scripture to me?" And we had a good laugh, because I haven't read that yet. And he became my friend. And not a good friend, but a constant friend. He would find me every once in a while and talk to me and share things. And the day I got out of prison at 25 years into my sentence, when my sentence was done, he walked next to me and said, "Tell me what to do so I can be like you." And he's doing triple life. He killed a family during a home invasion. He'll never get out of prison, but I'll see him in heaven. So I'll see you in heaven, buddy. And I guess that's my story. Right now we're in Port Colborne. I work with boys as much as I can, and I work with families of boys. And that's, when I told this story when I told the thing about my mom crying and being shamed by the church people that did not understand what she was going through. We work with a lot of them too, so they understand how to work with their kids that are lost, right? This world eats up kids, and there's a lot of monsters out there, right? It's Sodom and Gomorrah. Read the stories. It's a dangerous world out there, right? You got to pray over your kids. I was raised in a Christian home. When push came to shove, I knew where north was. My Christian parents gave me the compass. So thanks.